Hello everybody, Larry Young here again with another segment of OLaMan Living Life with Purity. And today I want to tell you a little story about a hot August night back in 2004. And we were working at the property in Rome City, the site of the apparitions of Our Lady of America. And I was trying to make a go of it in multiple ways economically. And one of the ways was renting out rooms for overnight stays for locals visiting on the lake and other things like that. So we had rooms for rent. It's sort of like a bed and breakfast type of thing we tried doing. And it was going along, okay. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of business in this town. But we were opening up because no one else had opportunities for people to stay. And so we were doing this. And one weekend we had a couple showed up. And they were from Atlanta. And they needed a room because they were attending a wedding on the lake. And so we got them their room and all like that. And I told them, I said, we don't have air conditioning. And I said, it's going to be kind of warm. I said, but, you can have the windows open and we have some fans and things like that. We'll try to help keep you comfortable. And they thought that was fine. They said, well, we're used to the mugginess. We're from Georgia. And I said, well, be that as it may. I said, I'm just letting you know, we don't have air conditioning. We're not, the Holiday Inn or anything like that. And so they took the room and everything was going fine. They went to their event and came back and sat around and talked with my mother and father for a while into the night before they retired and went to bed. And after they had gone to bed, they were away for at least a solid hour. My mother and father, they decided to go to bed, and I did too. And I told there wouldn't be anyone at the front desk. They'd have to wait till morning to talk with anybody. So they did. And then the next morning, I was down making coffee and preparing things for their sort of continental breakfast, making some hot cinnamon rolls. And I think I made gooey buns that day because they were from the South. But anyway, we had all this good stuff out there. And the gentleman came down and he was really nice and got his coffee. He went back to the room. And then about a half an hour later, the lady came down and she wasn't so nice. She was pretty angry and pretty upset. And I said, what happened? Did you not sleep well? Was there, the air conditioning not good? She goes, oh, that was all fine. We had the door open and the windows open and everything was fine as far as that goes. She says, I'm going to report you to the police. And I said, well, what on earth for? And she says, well, it's about your night watchman. And I said, okay. I said, what happened? And she said, well, he kept flashing that blue light of his into our room at night, going around the walls and all like that and shining it on us. And, it would go away and then he'd, walk down the hallway. Then he'd come back and he'd shine that light in our room again. I said, or she said, what kind of a pervert is this guy? And I said, I really don't know. And I said, we have to look into this a little bit more. I said, could you tell me a little bit more about what you saw and how long it lasted? And she says, well, it happened like 3 or 4 times. And I said, okay. I said, what time of the night was this? She goes, well, it was between 1 and 4. It kept happening. And I said, okay. And I said, I'm sorry it disturbed you. And I said, I'm certainly going to have a talk with him, as soon as I hire one. And she just looked at me astonished. She says, what do you mean? I said, we don't have a night watchman. We were all in bed asleep. We went to bed an hour after you two went to bed. And she says, well, somebody was peeking in our room with a blue flashlight. And I said, well, it wasn't any of us, and we don't have a night watchman. And I said, the doors are secured. And I said, no alarms went off, so I'm certain nobody got in here. I said, there may be an explanation, though. She says, what is it? And I said, well, you realize you're staying in an apparition site. And she goes, well, what do you mean? I said, well, the Blessed Mother appeared here in 1956 to one of the nuns who was living here. And she says, oh, we don't believe in any of that shit. We're Jewish. And she says, and I'm a science editor for CNN. And I said, you do what? She says, well, I'm a producer. I do science essays and things like that for CNN. You've heard of us. I said, well, I may have seen some of your work. I don't know. I said, but whether you're Jewish or not, whether you believe in something, I'm telling you, it wasn't any of us. but I could try to tell you the Blessed Mother has been associated with blue light, and especially in a ball of blue light. And the woman again protested. She says, well, I told you, we don't believe in that shit. And I said, well, you may want to start believing in it. She says, well, why? I said, because remember, you're the one that told me what you saw. She wasn't very happy about that. They packed their bags and left, paid their bill fully. That was good. But, you know, it was just one of those things that when the potential for a miracle and a miraculous, you know, sort of intervention or intercession in somebody's life is happening, and they don't even want to consider it because of their preconceived notions. This is stopping a lot of people in our world from learning what a truth is, and rather than what a fallacy is. So we have to be mindful of these things as we deal with these folks, because many times they're just going to reject it out of hand because it doesn't go with their narrative. Whether they're a CNN science editor or not, the truth is the truth. And she had an actual personal experience with the truth. And it wasn't from us. There was no one had a blue flashlight, but there was a ball of blue light going through the halls that night, and it wasn't me. So I hope you folks have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And if you're traveling today, be safe. You know, check your brakes. Make sure you got, you know, blankets and a bottle of water with you in case you may get stranded someplace. You know, have a great time this holiday weekend. In the meantime, I love you, and I'll be back.